So this morning, for our sermon, our conversation here, we are talking about heat. And to start off, I'm going to share with you just a story about how heat was detected in our house in kind of an interesting way. And so I've got real quick here a picture of my dad. My dad, as a young guy, grew up in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. There he is. My dad's in the middle there. That's him and his brother pulling a load of, who knows, looks like telephone poles. One room schoolhouse. They did not have an easy time getting to the doctor all the time, but it was fortunate because my dad's mom was a nurse. And so my dad picked up little things from her, kind of homeopathic ways to deal with illness throughout his childhood, and he brought those kind of into our home. And so, for example, one of the things that we would do is that if my brother or my sister or I were not feeling well, we had a fever or something. My dad, who's a great guy, but not super affectionate in terms of kissing. This was one of the times when we would get a kiss from my dad, and you can take that slide down. But he would, once we thought we had a fever, we would go over to my dad. He'd call us over, and he would just gently kiss us on our foreheads. And with that kiss, and I mean, the guy was, for some reason, somehow he was better than a thermometer, because he could say, "No, you're not. You're fine. You know, you're faking it. Get back to work or go out and play or whatever." Or he could say, "Yeah, you know what? You're a little bit warm." Or he would say, "Gosh, you're hot. Your body is fighting something." And we just kind of one kiss, by paying attention to us, just one kiss on the forehead, my dad could let us know what was going on, and then we would move forward. If we were running a fever, if we were hot, we would then start to take some medication or lie down, rest, do whatever needed to be done to deal with the infection that was happening in our body. So this morning, as I said, as part of this Lenten season, we are talking about heat, and it made me think about just a very basic thing that we take for granted, and that is our inner heat. It's amazing to think how our internal stability is maintained by our body in order for our nervous system, our heart, our senses, our brain to work together. In order for all of those remarkable things to take place day in and day out, whether we're conscious or not, we need a very stable internal condition. And one example of that is that our body maintains a very static inner temperature. And that temperature, whether it's cold outside or it's hot outside, is, let's see, I'll give you a second if you remember what our inner temperature is. Normal is 98.6, right? And if we elevate that 98.6, our internal temperature, which stays just quite consistent, if we elevate that just less than 2 degrees, which is really interesting, only 2 degrees, from 98.6 to 100.6, then a doctor would say to you, or a healthcare person would say, you've got a fever, and that's not good, and you don't want to stay at that elevated heat. Just that small increment of increase, and our body starts to set off warnings, because we don't want to stay at that level. If we're fighting something like that, and our internal heat kind of goes up, our blood temperature, if it stays high, our heart then begins to pump blood to our extremities, and so that's why we get a little bit flush. Our brain sends sweat to the outside of our bodies to try to cool us down. All of this stuff starts to kick into place to keep us at a good temperature. And if we don't do that, if we can't get back to that 98.6, it starts to put a strain on our hearts, because they're working hard, and we can start to feel dehydrated, obviously. And then, if that stays for a while, you can start to do pretty serious damage to nerve endings. And because our brain is filled with nerves, you can actually do brain damage if that elevated temperature stays really, again, just a couple of degrees higher than usual. So we sadly are quite aware of this as a society and as individuals today. We need to pay attention to our bodies. We need to pay attention to our temperature and our fever. And so this morning's scripture that I want to read for us comes from Matthew chapter 8, and it is Jesus, a story of Jesus paying attention to someone's fever. So he picks up the signs of someone he knew, probably, and that was his friend Peter's mother-in-law. So I'm going to be reading here. You can read with me on the screen, Matthew 8, starting in verse 14. So When Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw Peter's mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and she began to wait on him. When evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him, and he drove out the spirits with a word and healed the sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken of through the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. So before you take that down, I just want to point out a couple of things. One is that if you see Jesus comes into Peter's house, and we know this, but sadly, women were not necessarily, if they were seen, they weren't necessarily to be heard, especially if Jesus was there to be teaching. But Jesus obviously recognizes everybody in the room, and in particular notices a woman who is lying down and recognizes it as Peter's mother-in-law. And somehow he picked up, whether it was through words that were spoken, something that he saw, somehow that he sensed she had a fever, and he went over to her, made time to actually touch her, which maybe could have been a dangerous thing, maybe made himself impure in the process, depending on what she was struggling with. And he healed her. And then she got up and she began to wait on them. It's kind of remarkable that Jesus would notice that, take that time, and that she would then, as a response to his healing, get up and start to care for them. So during this Lenten season, we are talking about God's creation, and we're talking about our role in it as people who were created, as the scripture says, people who were created by God out of the mud, right, in the garden in the beginning, and that we will one day become dust and rejoin the earth. So these mud creatures that we've been made in this Lenten season, we're talking about how we interact with the creation that we come from. We've been talking about water. Kristen talked about water and baptism. We talked about breath and wind. And then last week, I hope you were able to join us. If not, you can watch a taped copy of it. But Dee Cooper gave a great sermon, brought her dog, and actually Alex Treister brought his dog as well, and talked about animals and the things that we can learn from animals, what God can teach us through our friends on earth. So today, as I said, we're talking about heat, and all of us, of course, our internal bodies, our planet, the plants that cover the earth, the water, all of it gets its heat and energy from our local star, which we have called the sun. Ever since we have been on this planet, we have been obsessed with the sun for good reason. We've marked it, we've watched it, we've written songs about it, we've actually worshipped it as humans. The psalm that Kristen read in the very beginning as our call to worship was Psalm 19, and I want to read just a little bit of that again to you, because in it David personifies the sun as a bridegroom, right? Heaven is declaring God's glory. The sky proclaims God's handiwork. God has made a tent in heaven for the sun, who is like a groom coming out of his honeymoon suite, thrilling to run his course. It rises at one end of the sky, and its circuit is complete at the other, and nothing escapes its heat. That was the understanding of the sun in those biblical times. And really, as we've talked about this before, up until about 600 years ago, this ancient pre-scientific understanding of the world was one that most humans shared, and it certainly was ones that the biblical writers shared. And I've shared this with you before, but here's a quick image of what that looked like. So as you can see, you've got the earth. It's flat because it looks flat, right? It's observable, and all of this understanding came from what people could observe, what was kind of passed down from generation to generation, but also from religious writings, which weren't necessarily scientific, but dealing with the knowledge that they had. You've got the heavens above, you've got an ocean above the heavens, and an ocean to the side, and then if you look, you can see at the top, there's the little jagged nooks in the heaven. That was called the firmament, and it was kind of like a big glass globe. And when God wanted to send rain, God opened up those windows and rain came. And you can see the stars up in the firmament there, and you can see the sun and the moon that ran their course. And so that was the understanding. And within that literal biosphere that humans shared with the plants and the animals, we made our way, and we lived, and we died, and we had our being. We existed in that balanced relational space. And it was tenuous, and we knew that it called for responsibility and reconciliation and collaboration between the animals and the people and the sky and the wind and the stars and the sun. And we also knew that humans needed to allow the land. We had to take care of the land. We had to allow the land to rest, just like we had to rest ourselves. And so, one other quick scripture I want to share with you, just as you know that God says, hey, you as humans, you should rest every 7 days. So in Leviticus 25, God said that the land also has to rest every day. And so I want to take a look at that passage real quick. So in Leviticus chapter 25, it says this: the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, once you enter the land that I am giving you, right? So this is right before they come into the promised land as a people wandering through the deserts. He said, the land must celebrate a Sabbath rest to the Lord. You will plant your fields for 6 years. You'll prune your vineyards and the crops for 6 years. But in the 7th year, the land will have a special Sabbath rest, the Sabbath rest to the Lord. And so the land even had to rest. And the people knew that, and they practiced that, right? They would allow for a fallow year every 7 years. We know that if we don't take time for rest, our own bodies do not function well, right? And we can get sick. You can take that slide down. And this is how Jesus found Peter's mom that day, right? When he went into Peter's house, he noticed that she was lying down and she wasn't well. She had a fever. And so he took the time to go over her, to touch her and to heal her before he did anything else. And then she got up and cared for them. So here's the thing. Our earth, like us, like the plants, right, needs heat and energy from the sun. But just like us, the earth is very sensitive. It's particular, just like our bodies are. And what the earth has been telling us in pretty uncertain terms, in pretty certain terms, is that for the last number of years, it's fighting a fever. It's got a fever, right? Its temperature has been elevated and it's not sustainable. And some people would say, gosh, it's only a couple of degrees. What's the big deal? But the fact of the matter is, just like our bodies, this static temperature over the course of hundreds and thousands of years has allowed for life to grow and has allowed for people to flourish, plants. And our earth has got a fever. Our earth is a little bit sick, and it's been telling us that for a while. And so many of you and many of us have been involved in trying to do something about that. And so I want to talk a little more particularly about that and share one person's story. And that person is Aaron Itczak. I've invited him in to share during this sermon time. Aaron grew up, good Catholic kid in Illinois, and grew up as an educator, and now works at Cerner. And actually at Cerner, he is on the Cerner Green Team, which he helped kind of really launch, and working with reducing their carbon footprint and working with that massive company to become greener. He's also a part of the KC Green Business Network. And so, Aaron, I want to invite you in and welcome you, and thanks for sharing a little bit about your story and your growth as a person trying to care for this hot earth of ours.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. Before I get started, I want to give you a little background into my journey, where it's all kind of started. That's me. When I was a kid, I've always, at least as far as I've known, as long as I've known, I've been passionate about the environment. When I was a kid, I would get angry when trees were needlessly cut down or when people would litter, which prompted me in high school, there it is, to be a part of the environmental club. And then later, when I was the dean of students at 2 elementary schools, I helped expand their recycling program. The environment has been a spiritual kind of experience for me, whether I go for a walk in the woods or whether I work in my yard. It gives me this feeling that I'm a part of something bigger than myself. And I can't help but feeling connected to other things around me.
Hey, Aaron?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, while you're quarantined, have you and Jimmy done any, gourd making, like the thing you've got in your hand there? Have you guys done any kind of?
No, that thing has long since passed, and we haven't done anything crazy. But we talked about actually doing some creative stuff, needing to activate that creative outlet. So you never know.
Right.
Yeah, we need to grow some gourds though. We're a little bit behind there. But spring is starting and gardening is happening. Our neighbors are starting. So we're composting. We're starting the building blocks for that process. So a couple months, you never know.
All right.
With that spiritual journey, a lot of you know that last year I got a tattoo. And part of the significance for that too, for me, has been that spiritual journey. There's a lot of other meaning behind that tattoo. So feel free to ask me next time you see me or online at some point. And if you want to know what extra meaning is behind that too, I am happy to share. As Paul had mentioned earlier, I lead the green team at Cerner, which we call the Eco Warriors. That is our logo there on the screen. And it really all started from me just asking a question of, where do I recycle batteries? And since then, our group over the past year has grown from 24 to 720 members. I meet with executives on a regular basis, and we have executive support. And the reason I share all that is I didn't think I could make a difference. And you might be thinking the same thing as well. But I want you to know that you can. All you have to do is ask a question and be willing to sit and be a part of the answer. So some of the things, thank you. Some of the things that our group does, we share sustainable stores. New things pop up all the time. And so we let people know what sustainable stores are in the area to shop there, especially now more than ever, to keep them in business. We also share ideas on how to repurpose and reuse things. We organize carpooling. We collect and recycle batteries and prescription bottles. And we also offer either donated or plates from Goodwills. We keep them in our desk as an alternative for people to use instead of the styrofoam plates in the break room. And as Paul mentioned earlier, I'm a part of the Green Business Network, which is a local nonprofit here in Kansas City, and it's an amazing resource. They've helped me kind of start this. They help businesses start this process with whether it's audits or resources. And so if you or your school, your business are looking at how do I start this, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can help. And once you're even a member like myself, like we have meetings, we share ideas, other people in businesses, like how did you overcome these obstacles? And we tour facilities and get ideas. It's an amazing resource. I can't speak highly or more highly about them. So on Jimmy is actually going to chat a resource document. The Green Business Network is listed there, and I'm going to reference this resource, there's a lot of R's there, throughout this presentation. The contact information for the Green Business Network is listed under Bridging the Gap. That's the overarching organization. The Green Business Network is just one element or one branch of it. So in case you're looking at that sheet and you're wondering, how do I contact the Green Business Network? Look for Bridging the Gap. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Great.
A lot of people ask why, because while I've been passionate about this my entire life, or like I said, at least as long as I can remember, my activism has really only kind of skyrocketed over the last couple of years. So a lot of people ask, well, what's the difference? What's the change? And I have to say, it is this guy. This is Jimmy, my husband. Today actually marks 5 years exactly from the first time we met. That's actually a picture from our first date.
Wow,
and
congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's gone by so fast. I can't believe it's been 5 years. And we're in the adoption process now, and we want to have a family. That's a picture of our nephew and niece, Emerson and Mason. They are watching actually right now from Indianapolis as we speak. We want to have a family, and science shows that we have about 10 years or so before irreparable damage with climate change takes its toll. And our kids, we're going to hand this to them. They're not going to have a say in it. This might be the first generation that has it worse off than us. And so when our kids ask us, they go, Dad, when you had a chance to do something, what did you do? I want to have an answer that I'm proud of. And that's kind of fueled me getting involved more at work and my community and in my own backyard.
Good for you. That's fantastic.
You.
So Aaron, if we wanted to do something, and we don't necessarily have to do exactly what you've done, but what basic kind of tips would you give to folks? What can you do about this whole process, this whole problem?
Based on my research, I think everything kind of boils down to two buckets. And the first bucket is, I'm going to actually jump ahead here.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. You want me to go back?
What was that last image? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. So actually, our own Alex Treaster shared this heat map with me. This is as a part of many cities in this article, but this is LA, and it's a satellite image over LA taking readings of pollution, particularly nitrogen and carbon dioxide. And the image on the left is Los Angeles a year ago in March.
Wow.
The one on the right is this March. And obviously there's a difference because of everything that's going on with this quarantine. And while this is a benefit of a horrible situation, it is going to be temporary. It's not going to last forever. So like you had mentioned, which I think is a great comparison to our fever and the Earth's fever, are we paying attention to the signs now to do something after this is all better?
Because clearly this shows that with some changes, obviously this is a catastrophic change and everyone's staying home. This isn't something, like you said, that's sustainable, but clearly our actions or lack of action does have a pretty quick impact on the earth, and so we do have an ability to affect change.
Yeah, we do. And I have a couple ideas. If you're asking that question yourself, like, well, what can I do? You feel like a small wheel in this big operation. Like I said, there's two buckets. One bucket as a whole is individually. What can you and your family do? And so I have two ideas within this bucket. And the first is plant a tree. One mature tree produces enough oxygen to support 2 adults. We have a symbiotic relationship with trees, as that graphic shows. They produce oxygen, which we breathe in. We breathe out carbon dioxide, which they breathe in. So it's a nice circle. However, we have way more carbon dioxide out there than there are trees to handle. And so planting more trees will definitely help. It won't solve everything, but it will definitely help. That symbol between the one and the image, that is bridging the gap, the resource that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They're always looking for volunteers. So if you live in an apartment or you don't have room to plant trees in your own yard, once the quarantine's all done, feel free to reach out to them. They're always looking for volunteers. They plant free trees in certain zip codes here in Kansas City. So reach out to them for that resource. The other idea that I have for what you and your family can do is eat less meat. One hamburger, what it takes to produce one hamburger from start to finish, just the fossil fuels are enough to fuel a car to go 20 miles. That's just the fossil fuels, let alone the land, the water, the other resources that it takes. And that's just one hamburger. So if you look at your meals for a week, especially right now, grocery shopping, this could help save money. Try to dial back on one meat meal a week. You don't have to go vegan. If you do, great. But if you're like, I'm not ready to make that type of commitment, I really like my meat, I am one of those people, just try to eat less. That makes a big difference and affects supply and demand.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The other bucket, like I mentioned, there are two buckets. That was the individual. Like if we all planted trees and we all ate less meat, that would help greatly. But it's not going to be the type of scale change that we need to make the big difference. We need to really move that needle in these 10 years. So for example, like if I wanted to reduce the amount of plastic, but plastic is the only thing that I can buy in the store, that's a problem. That's a system change we need.
Right.
And so in this bucket, the systemic changes are shop at sustainable stores. In that resource list that was chatted early, there's a list of brick and mortar places that you can go in, as well as some online stores here locally that you can shop at and support. Especially now, we want to keep them in business. The more people go to them, the more they will expand in their offerings, and the more other current stores, if they see like wow, people really want to buy sustainable things, they want your money, they're going to offer those products. You can even reach out to your current stores and say, hey, where's the items that have sustainable packaging? The more that you put out there, the more they're going to, like I said, apply. They want your money. You
That's
have
right.
the power here. Vote with your
That's right.
wallet. Yeah. And this last one is, in my opinion, the biggest one. It's policies and priorities. Nothing is going to change. For example, recycling. What you can recycle in Chicago when I lived there, you can't necessarily recycle here in Kansas City. There are no guidelines. Some places don't even offer recycling. There's no national standard. We need to reach out to our representatives, our political leaders who are supposed to represent our views and say, please make this a priority. In that resource list, there is a sample letter that I found online. I did my own tweaking to it. Feel free to use it and tweak it yourself. Maybe during this quarantine, if you need something to do, have a family writing campaign. In that letter too, there at the top, there is a link to look up who your reps are, and it provides their contact information so you can email them directly. I try to make it as easy as possible.
Resource. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. So please write them, and also then research. We need elected officials that will make the environment a priority. So as future elections happen, make sure you know who is in line with that. That's the biggest way that we're going to make change happen.
Great. And Aaron, where's that list of resources again? How can people find that?
It is on, so Jimmy chatted it earlier, and it might be buried in the thread. So in case you can't find it, it is also on Second's website, and it will be there for at least a while. I don't know how long it'll be on there, but at least it is there, so you can check it out at any time. If for whatever reason you can't find it, or you have questions about it or anything that I've presented today, you can use my email address there, and you can ask me questions. Also, feel free to email me ideas. We learn best from each other. I don't know it all. I'm still learning myself. So if you have cool ideas, please share them with me. I'm very, very open to that. And that's a picture of that resource list up on the screen as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Any concluding words?
Well, like I said earlier, it's been a very spiritual journey for me, but like anything, nobody likes to go at it by themselves. So I invite you to go on this spiritual journey with me, and let's see what we can do.
All right. Great. Thank you, Aaron, for listening, for paying attention, and doing all that you've done. In just a minute, I'll share a couple closing thoughts. But as soon as we're done with this sermon, I'm going to invite Micah to come back on. I actually skipped him. He was going to lead us in a little bit earlier. How great thou art, and then Kristen will follow that with a prayer. But it's interesting. We can get caught up sometimes in this conversation about what caused what or who's responsible for what, and that's a fine conversation to have. But the fact of the matter is, as followers of Christ, our call, our responsibility is to recognize those things that we are responsible for, and if they are sick, if they're crying out, to respond with a healing touch. And so I would encourage all of us just to listen the same way you would listen to a child if they had a fever, the same way you'd pay attention to an animal if they were injured, to pay attention to our earth, and to pray about ways that we can be a part of the healing and the caring for this wonderful creation that God has given us, so we can hopefully help this fever to slowly come down for the good of us and for our planet. So as we think about this and what we can do, I would invite Micah to come on and lead us in a hymn. And as we do that, I would also invite you to take just a minute during this time to, while you're already online, maybe you've got your device open in front of you, or just make a note. I would encourage you just to reach out to somebody else and just give a word of encouragement, whether you're just saying hi to somebody or you're passing the peace with each other. But let's respond to Aaron's encouraging words and our scripture today by reaching out to each other, connecting with each other, and thinking about contemplating ways that we can connect with the earth and be better cohabitants with this wonderful creation of ours. So thanks again, Aaron. Thanks everybody, and Micah, take it away.